Hey guys, Legendaray here and welcome back to another Clash Royale video. Now the Season 23 Global Tournament in Clash Royale is starting in just a couple of days. And although there have not been any sort of balance changes over the past month, there still definitely has been a slight shift in the meta over the past couple of weeks, with certain decks phasing out of the meta and being replaced with some other newer decks. Therefore, today I'm going to be going over the top 5 decks that I would recommend you guys run in this upcoming global tournament and in this current Clash Royale meta in general. These are 5 decks that have shown to do consistently well in grand challenges and are also quite popular on top ladders, so you can be sure that these are 5 decks that work very well in this current meta. With each deck, we're going to be going over a quick synopsis of the synergies and strategies that come along with playing this deck, and as usual, deck links are going to be down in the description for those of you that are interested. And hey, while you're down there, be sure to leave a like on the video and subscribe to my channel for more videos like this one. Also, if you'd like to support me, feel free to use code Legendaray in the shop. Any support would be greatly appreciated. Finally, I have made a Twitch channel where I will be mostly streaming non-Clash Royale content, so if you're interested, be sure to check that out. And with all of that out of the way, let's get right into the decks. Number 1, Golem Clone. Now, Golem Clone has always been a deck that generally is an off-meta option that you can use in a meta, but in May of 2021, Golem Clone has actually found a very solid spot in this meta. This is because a lot of the most popular decks currently do not have very good answers to both a heavy beatdown deck as well as carry heavy swarm control as well. So, starting off, let's just put it out there, this is going to be a bit of a more aggressive type of beatdown deck. You're taking a lot of damage, going in for these all-out pushes, and trying to take a tower in one fell swoop. To do this, personally, I would recommend cycling some of your cheap cards at the very beginning. Ideally, you're going to want to make your opponent spend one of their most valuable counters, and then literally just immediately golem. The unfortunate part of this meta is that goleming in single elixir actually isn't the worst thing in the world, especially in this deck where you're trying to build up these massive pushes. In addition to that, you have some very cheap answers to any sort of push that your opponent can rush you with in the bats as well as the skeleton army. In addition, the Night Witch and Flying Machine can be useful defensive options as well, especially the Flying Machine, which can be used to snipe away units from the opposite lane, allowing you to support your golem push while defending at the exact same time. On the offensive of this deck, as with most beatdown decks, you're watching out for one major thing: the opponent's spell value. Especially in this deck where it's all about baiting out your opponent's swarm control, making sure that you're spacing out your units or baiting out your opponent's spells is going to be very important in getting your units to the tower. Now, personally, there are 2 main ways to do this. The first way is with the skeleton barrel. By sending a skeleton barrel in with the rest of your push, it may oftentimes get your opponent's splash answers or small spells out of cycle immediately, but the second approach I'll take is to not go all in on a push immediately. Wait a little bit with maybe a golem and 1 support troop, and then as soon as the opponent spends their splash counter or spends their big spell, then immediately go in with the rest of the units as well as that clone spell. Now, against some matchups, you won't be able to break through your opponent's defenses in one big push, but oftentimes, once one push gets taken down, you'll be back to a golem and you can already begin building up a second golem push, just going over and over again with these huge beatdown pushes until you force your opponents to crack and break through their defenses. Number 2, Mortar Miner control. Now, this is a much faster mortar deck that has taken this meta by storm. It has become one of the most popular cycle decks, boasting a high use rate in both ladder as well as in grand challenges. Now, this is a very fast chip based deck, so starting out the match, you're always cycling some of your cheap cards, may that be your skeletons, your log, or your miner, to start getting some chip damage onto the opponent's tower. Sometimes it may even be okay to go in with a mortar first play, as this will immediately force your opponents to respond and immediately force the opponent to be on the defensive end. Now, the thing that makes this deck very difficult is that you're going to have to play it slightly differently depending on what type of matchup you're going to be against. Against most matchups, you're going to be playing this very, very high pressure oriented. When your opponent makes a big commitment in the back, go in with E-barbs in the opposite lane, or send in a miner, or go in with a mortar. The goal with these types of decks is you're going to apply so much pressure that your opponents simply are not able to build up the type of pushes that they want to be able to build. This deck has 3 win conditions in the mortar, the E-barbs, and the miner, so there's more than enough options for you to go in on the offensive. On the defensive end, this deck is also so solid. The mortar serves as a defensive building to pull any tanks or building targeting units. The elite barbarians and the musketeer serve as your high damage outputs, and the ice golem is very effective at kiting units away and pulling apart the opponent's pushes. Now let's go over 2 special cases that I think are very important to point out. The first is if you're against an air deck, may that be Balloon Cycle or Lava Hound. In this matchup, the key to winning it is in 3 cards: the musketeer, the mortar, and the fireball. Make sure that you at least have one of these in cycle at all times, just so that you're not caught in a hand where you simply do not have any air counters. That being said, if you are in such a situation, well then consider rushing in the opposite lane with something such as an elite barbarian push. Against Golem Beatdown, if the opponent goes in with a golem in the back, do not, and I repeat, do not go in with a mortar in the opposite lane. This deck does not have a fast enough cycle where you'll be able to cycle to a second mortar, and you can rush with some other unit, but using your only building unit will mean that you'll no longer be able to distract the golem, which will allow the golem to get death damage and all of this bad stuff on your arena tower. Number 3, Royal Hogs Fireball Bait. Now this has been a deck that has pretty much topped the charts over the past couple of months. It's just so effective, and if you do want to run a more expensive variation, some players do sub in the Mother Witch for the Electro Spirit. But starting off, this is a double lane pressure heavy deck, and it's also a controlled deck, meaning that starting off, you're going to be a little bit passive, cycling your Goblin Cage, cycling your Zappies, cycling your Barb Barrel, or cycling your Electro Spirit. This is to force your opponents to make the first major commitment, and from there, it's very important that you just play reactively. The control of this defense is quite unorthodox, but very effective. First off, the Goblin Cage pulls any sort of big tanks, as well as spawns a high damage output brawler. The Zappies are able to stall the opponent's pushes, may that be ground or air units alike. The Royal Recruits are kind of your catch-all for any type of defensive push, being able to stop pushes in both lanes very effectively. Finally, the Flying Machine is kind of like the sniper in this deck. Play it very far from the rest of your push, avoiding spell value from your opponents. Speaking of spell value, this is a Fireball Bait deck after all, so utilizing the Fireball Bait synergy between the units in this deck is going to be very effective, because, you know, once the opponent uses their spell on one of them, you're free to use any of your other units very effectively. On the offensive end of this deck, it's a double lane deck, and in some cases, it's also kind of like a beatdown deck in that you're building up a big push from the back. Once you have the elixir, go in with those Royal Recruits in the back, split the Zappies, go with the Flying Machine, split the Royal Hogs, and you can just build up such a massive push with so many units that it can be insanely difficult for your opponents to deal with. In fact, even if an initial push doesn't break through, it'll oftentimes force your opponents to overextend so much that by the time they defend your first push, you're already building up a second one from the back of the arena. Despite the heavy elixir cost, this is a rather aggressive deck, so that's just something important that you're keeping in mind. Number 4, Electro Giant Beatdown. Now, Electro Giant Beatdown is, I'd say, kind of like the new Splash Yard. It's here to stay, and it's here to dominate this meta. The reason that Electro Giant Beatdown is probably going to remain very good for the foreseeable future is because of the uniqueness of the Electro Giant himself, meaning that there are multiple ways for you to try to break through to your opponent's tower. Starting off with the offense, the first way that you're going to be breaking through is, of course, like a traditional beatdown push. You're getting that Electro Giant to the tower and you're getting these support units to connect and deal massive damage. The other way you can get damage is by simply getting the Electro Giant himself to the arena tower. Once that Electro Giant even reaches the opponent's tower, it's gonna almost guarantee like 1,000, 2,000 damage right off the bat, because every single time the tower attacks the Electro Giant, it's going to attack right back at the arena tower. There are multiple ways for you to do this, using the lightning to take out any sort of buildings, or using the tornado to nullify any ranged units that the opponent may have placed down. In addition, your other splash units can be very, very effective at slowing down and controlling the opposing units as well. Now, the offense of this deck is great and all, but the defense of this deck is where it really shines, because the control of this deck is so solid. Just looking at the defense, the Splasher plus NATO combination is so unstoppable when played effectively, and combined with mini tanks such as the Goblin Cage as well as the Barbarian Barrel, it can almost stop any push from a gigantic beatdown push to a quick cycle hog deck. All in all, the defense of this deck is very simple, and combining that with a very versatile offense with multiple ways of getting to the opponent's tower, this is definitely another top choice for you guys to use in this upcoming meta. Number 5, Royal Giant Mother Witch. Now, this is a bit of a niche deck that has, still been quite popular in this current meta. Royal Giant itself has not been seen as much, but in this specific deck combination, it is still very effective. Now, this is a bit of a faster cycle deck, meaning that just like the Mortar deck I shared earlier, you're going to be constantly cycling your cards and applying high pressure onto the opponents. Starting off the match, I'm cycling my cheap cards and waiting for the opponents to play something for me to respond to, and after that, the play of this is very reactive. If they play some sort of swarm, then go in with your Mother Witch, or if they play some sort of tank, just cycle your E-Barbs or cycle your Fishermen to prepare to respond to whatever the opponent throws at you. The great thing about these Royal Giant decks is that they are very versatile, because not only can you play your Royal Giants at the bridge, but you can also play them in the back, slow rolling and building up a big beatdown type push as well. In double elixir time, this can be very effective, because when you build a Royal Giant in the back, you're actually allowing yourself to cycle back to a second Royal Giant much quicker. And I mean, one Royal Giant's deadly enough. Imagine if you can get 2 Royal Giants on the field. Diving more into the offense of this deck, it's very important to know what counters your opponents have to your Royal Giant. If they have a single heavy hitting unit, it's important to play your Fisherman first to pull that heavy hitting unit out of the way. If they have swarms, it's important to make sure that your Mother Witch is in cycle so you can play her down and spawn a ton of additional hogs to help support your offensive push. Finally, the Elite Barbarians can be an option, but just note that they are quite expensive, so you usually will not be using the E-Barbs with your offensive push unless you're in like double or triple elixir time. Now, the defensive end of this deck is where it becomes a little bit more difficult to play, in my opinion. First off, the Elite Barbarians are there for your main tank damage. The Fisherman is there to pull any sort of big tanks, as well as get possible King Tower activations. And again, the Mother Witch is there to deal with any sort of swarms your opponents can have. The one very big glaring weakness of this deck is the fact that it doesn't have that much air defense. So when you're playing this deck, there are 2 options you can do. The first is you're trying to cycle to multiple Mother Witches, but that's usually not something that I like to do. Personally, I like to pressure the opposite lane and force your opponents to simply not build up the air pushes that they want to. You can do this by playing a Royal Giant at the bridge or E-Barbs at the bridge. There are so many quick pressure options to force elixir expenditure from your opponents that when played properly, even though you technically only have 1 air defense deck, you can apply enough pressure so that the opponents simply cannot use those air pushes to their potential. All in all, still a very solid and fast-paced deck for you guys to play, so definitely another one of the top choice decks for you guys to play. So there we go, the 5 decks that I would recommend you guys play in this upcoming global tournament and in the Season 23 May meta as well. These are 5 decks that, again, have shown to do consistently well in both top ladder as well as in grand challenges. And for those of you interested, the deck links are going to be down in the description. I wish you guys the best of luck in this upcoming tournament, but unfortunately, guys, that's all I've got time for in today's episode. Huge thanks to all of my channel members. You guys are the absolute G's. If you enjoyed, please leave a like down below, as well as a subscription to my channel. And as always, this is Legendaray, and I'm signing off. See you guys next time.